Welcome to the whole Megillah. I'm Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein. And there's a lot going on.
There always is.
So as we talk today about all the things that are going on in the world, just a reminder that our opinions shared on this show are our opinions and our opinions alone. They are not the opinions of any of the organizations that we work for. So with that, Mark, we could start off with Vice President Biden at the J Street conference today. Vice President Biden expressed overwhelming frustration with Israel's government. Actually, this is yesterday, I guess.
Okay.
And said that Netanyahu's administration has led the country in the wrong direction, essentially rebuking Israel. And his position, I mean, I think essentially is that Israel needs to either advance the cause of a two-state solution or at least do its best to maintain the prospects of a two-state solution. I don't know if he really differentiates between the two of those.
Well, the remarks that the vice president made were not particularly specific. He made certain allegations, but these are the same allegations he's articulated on many different occasions, even in some respect during his speech at AIPAC about a month ago.
Well, and it's also problematic because at the same time as he says this, he also says there's no will for peace on the Palestinian side. Even as he's pointing out that it's difficult to deal with the Israeli position on this. And he doesn't, while he's talking about this, he doesn't talk about the fact that the Israeli government, of course, is a democracy, and there are different parties that participate in the government. And some of these political parties are putting pressure on the Netanyahu administration to take actions in regard to settlement construction and other things. And that in order to move forward with any kind of a peace agreement, the Israeli government, the Netanyahu government, clearly needs help from others in order to make that work. So as there's constant threat of overthrowing the government from within Israel, from the opposition parties, Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to be reluctant to take any decisions, make any decisions that are going to jeopardize his own coalition. And even if the government did fail and new elections were called, these same groups would be in opposition to a peace agreement anyway. So it doesn't really change a whole lot of the dynamic for that to happen.
Well, there's certain things that one could put under a microscope. The value, first of all, of articulating this in public, especially at a time when, as we'll mention, the Israelis found a new terror tunnel dug under its borders, and yesterday a bus was blown up in Jerusalem.
So you're saying, finding out that Hamas continues to try to attack and then having a terrorist attack should somehow impact how the United States addresses the issue of its relationship with Israel and its support of Israel and what the Prime Minister of Israel might be able to do? I mean, it seems fairly obvious to me that that's the case.
Well, he had prepared remarks, and it's very difficult for elected officials to go off the cuff. But apparently, the worst issue is, to the American administration, one might argue, is Israeli intransigence
Intransigence, yeah.
And the fact that there's a discussion about what exactly constitutes a settlement, meaning that certain things that are to one person a settlement in the outback in the West Bank is different from others who call Jerusalem itself a settlement.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that the United States doesn't believe that Israel has sovereignty over all of Jerusalem, but at the same time, it doesn't believe that Jerusalem is a real settlement in the way that it talks about other areas of the West Bank, because technically the United States also didn't recognize Jordanian control of Jerusalem and wouldn't recognize Palestinian control of Jerusalem either. So what's interesting is, according to the United States, functionally Jerusalem really is disputed territory, and I'm not sure how they deal with that, because Jerusalem never had a recognized status. It had a planned status as an international city in 1947 that was never actually put into practice as recognized as anything, as far as I understand it. So the State Department doesn't recognize anybody's authority, at least over the Old City and the Holy Basin, as far as I know.
Well, that has political ramifications, especially among those who believe that most of the territory belongs literally to the Palestinians to begin with.
So we have two different problems. One, we've got people who are advocates for the Palestinians who believe that all the territory should belong to the Palestinians. We also have advocates for Israel who believe that all the territory belongs to the Jews, and that there's a Palestinian state on the other side of the River Jordan. That's the standard argument we hear from them.
We also have a dispute about what building in the settlements actually means, whether it's expanding the borders or just filling in the borders that are currently in existence. And the argument has always been, because there's a lack of peace, and because that lack of peace is ostensibly due to the intransigence of the Palestinians, that the people who live there in the Jewish settlements or neighborhoods have a right to lead normal lives, and therefore, in the course of those normal lives, to construct particular buildings on their property to live. That, I think, is the excuse or the rationale that would be articulated by people who live on the West Bank.
Well, yeah, and you also have the issue that some of these settlements, especially what we would call outposts, is kind of outlying places that are somewhat isolated, that require Israeli security to keep them safe and to make sure that people have access, that's safe access. Most of those are places that would be abandoned in a peace agreement.
Right.
And so the concern, of course, is that if you make those too big, you won't be able to abandon them, or at least it's more difficult to abandon them.
Well, the second thing people should realize is I don't think we're taking any position on the settlements whatsoever. There is a political situation there that can be argued any number of different ways. And the major point that Israel wants to make, essentially, is that this is disputed territory. If you don't believe it's disputed territory, you come out with wholly different interpretations of what the future should look like, what the present should look like.
Well, and the other question is who can actually enforce it to make it work? I mean, there are a couple different concerns. There's the level of pressure that can be put on Israel. I mean, if you're coming at it from how do we force Israel to do something, there's a level of pressure that you could put on Israel that could potentially make it make some concessions that would cost it in other ways. Some might not cost it at all. Some might cause internal political problems. But there are also concessions that you could attempt to force upon Israel that would cause it to react with a strong no against the international community and not be responsive at all, and potentially seek other means to assure itself. And some of the security situation is definitely there. I mean, if you said tomorrow Israel needs to give up control of the Jordanian border and allow free access to anybody who wants to come in, and open up Gaza tomorrow to allow anybody who wants to come in, the security situation would be such that Israel couldn't comply to that. Even if it didn't really matter how much pressure you put on Israel, because it would be too dangerous to do that. They would have to be able to do things to ensure their security situation.
And essentially,
a lot of people don't get that.
And essentially, what the vice president is saying, it understands Israel's security needs better than Israel does, and part of that has to do with the vice president's statement about future funding for military articles are requested by Israel. What the vice president apparently said is Israel will not get everything it wants, but will definitely get everything it needs.
And he said that at the AIPAC policy conference.
He said it at the policy conference. I'm not sure he's not said it elsewhere, but the implication is that America knows best about what Israel's security needs are.
Well, and that obviously doesn't make any sense. I mean, clearly, America may have some sense of what Israel needs from its own perspective, but very clearly, Israel has its own perspective on what it needs. And the problem that comes up, I mean, obviously, you're dealing with two different countries here. The United States and Israel have a lot of things in common. They have a lot of strategic goals in common, but they're not uniform. I mean, the United States is trying to build relationships with other countries in the region, some of which are not happy with Israel. Meanwhile, Israel is trying to build relationships with other countries around the world that aren't necessarily in agreement with the United States. And some of the actions that Israel may take in regard to the Palestinians, for example, may well be ones that are in line with its relationship with Egypt, or in line with its relationship with Jordan, or even Saudi Arabia now.
But not in line with American.
But not in line with America's desire for future expectation for the Palestinian state. Which is big. This is a big problem for the Palestinians. Is that historically the Palestinians have been able to say, if you make peace with us, we will. The rest of the Arab nations will then work with you to try to normalize relations. And that was the big incentive. Well, what's happened in recent years, so really since 2012, since the Arab Spring really got going, is that a lot of the Arab countries have reached out to Israel, or at least been more willing when Israel reached out to them, to build up a relationship regardless of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. And they got to the point where they realized that having a direct relationship with Israel is more important to them than advocating for the Palestinian cause. This has meant that the Palestinians have much less to offer at the negotiating table than they once did. It was bad enough that they were having to offer what other countries could give Israel instead of even what they could concede. Now, basically, the Palestinians are in a situation in which the primary thing they can offer is an absence of Palestinian violence against Israel. They already can't realistically offer something that Israel already has, right? So offering territory is not really a Palestinian concession, because what they're asking for is Israel granting them territory. The only thing the Palestinians can grant territorially is to concede that what Israel is already in possession of actually should belong to Israel. Well, that's not a huge, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a huge concession to make. If possession is 9/10 of the rule to begin with, so Israel possessing disputed territory means that it actually has the higher legal claim. If Palestinians go to the international court and they want to claim that Israel doesn't have a right to this territory or that territory, they run into the problem that Israel has possessed the territory ever since it became disputed territory. And the only other possessor of the territory, the nation of Jordan, got rid of its claim to the territory, meaning there's only one claimant left that has ever possessed the territory as a legal entity. And this causes also significant problems for the Palestinians. pursuing Israel in international fora could actually backfire on the Palestinians rather than even being something that would gain them. Yeah.
Well, the complexity is compounded by the relationship between Abbas, representing the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. So we currently talk about a two-state solution. Is Hamas its own state to begin with? That would be a three-state solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly clear that no matter what happens, you will realistically have a three-state solution right now unless you remove Hamas from power. And the recognition of Hamas, I don't think gets international sanction, even if Israel were okay with it, because I don't think that most of the Arab world would okay Hamas and a Muslim Brotherhood state in the region.
Well, that's it. It's their affiliation as a Muslim Brotherhood state, which is opposed by Saudi Arabia, which is opposed by Egypt.
And right now, Israel has much more to lose in its relationship with those countries than it would have in gaining from an actual peace agreement that moved forward. So what we got a problem with in the region that people need to understand as a major issue is that there are long-term solutions and goals and there are short-term solutions and goals. You're never going to get to the long-term solutions and goals if they are not in line with your short-term solutions and goals and needs. So this idea that you're going to be able to create a Palestinian state in the long term by giving Hamas authority or opening the eastern border to Jordan and all this stuff, if it's not in line with the current needs of Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, it's not going to happen because you're never going to get to the next steps that would require that would be required as part of that process if you can't take step one. So when we get back from our break, we're going to talk a little bit about what happened in the terrorist attack the other day, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Passover. We have a holiday coming up this weekend, and we want to talk a little bit about that, the Passover holiday and Jewish identity.
Credit cards are like grandkids. They love you, sometimes get out of control, and it's fun to get a new one. Who can stop them from piling on?
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of Des Moines. At the end of the day, you can return the grandkids, but you're stuck paying off bad credit card debt. We'll help you put the fun back into using credit cards responsibly. Right, kids?
Yeah!
If you need help getting credit cards off your back, call Consumer Credit of Des Moines.
Hi, my name is David Burrier, your Hope Coach. I host a live weekly talk show called I've Been There every Thursday afternoon at 5:30, right here on webcast1live.com, and on my weekly radio program Saturday mornings at 10 on Truth Network 99.3 FM. I interview common everyday people who have survived incredible life challenges and who testify to God's faithfulness in the midst of their storms. So join me as we bring a message of hope and encouragement. Everybody needs hope. I know, because I've been there.
Hey everybody, I brought Northern Lights Pizza! And it's got Graziano sausage!
Rock Prevention is celebrating 25 years of creating a caring community. We want to say thank you to the tens of thousands of Rock High School mentors that have carried our message of health, love, and encouragement to over 1.5 million children, teachers, and parents. Our mentors teach children methods and skills to prevent bullying and drug use. Thank you to all the school administrators, teachers, and counselors for their opportunity to serve you. Rock on, fair citizens, rock on! This is Pat McManus for Rock and Prevention, the Richard O. Jacobson Foundation, and this station.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Megillah. I'm Rabbi David Kaufman of Temple B'nai Jeshurun. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines. And while we are affiliated with those organizations, the opinions expressed here today are our opinions and our opinions alone. They do not represent those of the organizations for which we work.
And I'm not even sure they will have the same opinion tomorrow.
And they may not have, we or they may not have the same opinion tomorrow. A number of things have happened. We mentioned briefly that there was a terrorist attack in Jerusalem, a bus bombing. There are not a whole lot of details about the bus bombing. In fact, I've seen some sources that say the bomb was placed on an unoccupied bus that exploded near an occupied bus. There's some question as to whether or not the bomb exploded accidentally instead of when there were people on the bus, or that if it was left for some reason. And
well, there's some criticism to begin with of CNN, which particularly had a headline calling it a bus fire. And as I think we would agree, it depends how long into the reporting they maintain that same headline.
Yeah, I mean, once the government says, no, this is a bomb, then you go to this is a bomb. And there are a couple of different issues that happened. First off, the injuries that were described after this happened were fire injuries. So it's potentially the case that that they described it as a fire because everyone was talking about a fire. The normal explosion shrapnel injuries that you have with this kind of bomb evidently happened on the unoccupied bus. You know, the shrapnel caused a fire on the adjacent bus that is what injured all the people who were injured, and then some bystanders outside. Yeah. So it's possible that they thought that this was just a fire, but in that case, it would have been just a fire bomb. It wouldn't have been not a bomb, right? I mean, people heard an explosion and all of that that went along with it.
Well, certainly the most obvious thing one looks for is who congratulates the bomber. And in this particular case, we have evidence that both Hamas and Fatah,
and I think Islamic Jihad too.
I'm sure Islamic Jihad is.
But there's no actual claim of authority. We've got claims of praise being offered by those groups, but there's no actual claim of authority. And it's possible that this was a lone wolf who didn't execute the attack as well as somebody who was more trained to do it. Yeah. Which is why we don't have large numbers of deaths instead of simply other injuries.
Well, unfortunately, this brings back many bad memories for Israelis, who, especially in 1996 or thereabout, there were bombings on Egged buses in Israel, and for the period of time, most people avoided taking public transportation.
Yeah, and I remember my year in Israel. We actually lived in an apartment close to where I needed to go to classes because we didn't want to have to take public transportation at all on a regular basis. And I remember that anywhere we went that we needed to take public transportation, we took a bus because we took a taxi because taking a bus was not something that we wanted to do.
And as a result, several things happened. First of all, I believe they placed guards on the buses. And they no longer have guards on the buses. And
well, this may have been part of the problem, is that somebody was taking advantage of lax security. That was a report. I mean,
lax security or just normal security?
Well, or an absence. I mean, the problem with these attacks is they're constantly looking for ways to get through security, and so you have to constantly adapt to whatever the security situation is. This is the criticism, by the way, of TSA security in the airports, is that what ends up happening oftentimes in these situations is that security simply responds to whatever the last threat was, and it's not proactive. Israeli security is really proactive. It doesn't try to figure out what the next attack is going to, well, at least what the current attack is going to be, and address that all the time. Because you really can't. There's always something that somebody can do. You have to be able to look at a situation and address the situation as it is. So each person is addressed individually, which is why oftentimes when these terrorist attacks are stopped, it's because a security guard confronted whoever the individual was. In fact, a significant majority of them are stopped that way. A security guard, a police officer confront the person, who then prematurely either detonates the bomb or does some sort of an attack right away because they were found out. And then Israel spends time trying to figure out what the plan was going forward, that they just stopped, because oftentimes they don't know what the details were. They may well have already stopped multiple attempts to do what happened yesterday.
They probably have, because what we hear every now and then, there were multiple attempts of various sorts that have been foiled. We never hear about those attempts because they never happen.
Or at least we don't hear the details. We just hear,
maybe
that it was stopped.
Basically, 4 months later, somebody says, by the way, these were the things we stopped. But the problem here essentially is of copycats. And all across history, we've had copycat instances. The fact that there were suicide bombers created other suicide bombers. The fact that the current reign of terror promoted by the terrorists of knifing have been emulated by other people. So, and the same thing with car rammings that were pretty popular at a particular time. So I guess the Israelis are looking now to see if indeed somebody else is going to try to replicate the same.
I mean, it is a little bit more sophisticated to build a bomb and have the bomb work than it is to do a stabbing or a car ramming. So this is definitely a different level of
preparedness
right?
as well. But I'm not terribly sure that it's that difficult to build a bomb, to tell you the truth. So we'll just have to...
Especially with some help. So there are a number of different things going on right now that have to do with Jewish identity and threats to Jewish identity. There was a UNESCO report that came out, a resolution that basically ignored Jewish connection to the land of Israel entirely. It's kind of hard, and specifically to the Temple Mount.
Well, this shows bad will, it shows bad history, and it shows terrible bias on the part of the United Nations. I don't think anybody can argue around that. The fact that the Temple Mount is traditionally the holiest place for the Jewish people, that historically at least 2 different temples stood at that particular space, and that we have artifacts from both, essentially, right? Okay. And so what does it tell you when an esteemed international body says there's no historical evidence to show that the Jews had any presence in this area?
We're going to play politics with history.
We're going to play politics with history.
Yeah, and it really is. And this is part of why the UN and advocates for Israel. This is part of why the United States and many advocates for Israel and Israel specifically are oftentimes so frustrated with the United Nations that it doesn't really matter what the United Nations says. You can't really have a whole lot of authority to convince Israel to do anything when you pass resolutions like this. And you're really not going to get the support of many of the people you need to get if you can't even deal with reality. If you're obviously a political organization that is advocating for the Palestinian side against Israel, then anything you see can automatically be deemed at that right off the bat, whether you're trying to or not. There's no such thing as an unbiased UN report. There's no such thing as an unbiased UN resolution dealing with Israel. Because if they allow this to happen, then, of course, you automatically assume that something else is. Now, the fact is even worse that the United Nations automatically does these things anyway. Many of the resolutions are super biased. The question is oftentimes whether or not the United States is going to step in and veto something at the United Nations Security Council, not whether or not the United States is going to like anything that comes from the United States Security Council about Israel. The retaliation, if the United States ever gets upset about Israel, would simply be to let something slide, basically as a way to slap Israel or as a way to punish Israel, because it knows that everything that comes in front of it dealing with Israel is hostile to Israel. There's never any resolutions that are pro-Israel that come through. And so this is why it raises questions as to why the United States continues to even pretend that there is anything actually reasonable that comes through these organizations.
Somebody had pointed out that most of the American administrations had let certain things slide through the UN and had not vetoed it. But the point was that the Obama administration has vetoed these resolutions consistently. And that's a good point. Well, I think it's important to understand that at the United Nations, the Obama administration has done what it said it would do. Yes.
And it's also important, as we near potentially another vote, that the Obama administration has promised to continue to veto these resolutions. So even though people are very worried, many people are very worried that the Obama administration is not going to veto a resolution proposed by the Palestinian Authority about settlements and land, the reality is I fully expect the Obama administration to continue vetoing things. Vice President Biden said absolutely that he would. And the reality is that by allowing resolutions to come through the Security Council that the Security Council has realistically no intent or ability to enforce in the short term, you undermine the authority of the organization. So unless there really is an attempt, unless there really is a desire to force Israel to comply with the territorial concessions, and you're willing to accept whatever consequences happen because of that, there's no reason to allow it to go forward. Because if you allow it to go forward and Israel doesn't comply and you can't do anything about it, you risk undermining the entire authority of the organization. Because anything else you put forward, you're going to be accused of saying, well, you didn't enforce that. Why should I expect you to enforce this? So I can't imagine that the United States, which would have no political will to take action against Israel in any significant way, would then allow a resolution to go forward from the UN Security Council that would essentially require it to do that. Then, I mean, does that make sense?
Well, it does. And the fact that the United States sometimes have policy differences with Israel itself is not bad. The question is how you deal with it. And the best way to deal with it is quietly in person and not through the headlines.
Well, it's very clear that the broader long-term situation and meeting short-term needs both require Israel and the Palestinians to work together. There is no solution that is going to be good for the Palestinians in which it is not cooperating with Israel on economics and any number of other things. And so having the international community take a stand that would require Israel to sever ties with the Palestinians would be catastrophically bad for the Palestinians. Any action that would require even Israel to step back or to increase security on its internal border would be very bad for the Palestinians. So, I mean, there are consequences here that a lot of people don't realize. Palestinian economy needs access to Israel. It needs access to tourist sites. It needs people to be able to come through Israel to go to those sites. If that doesn't happen, you end up creating a situation that would be extraordinarily much more difficult for international tourists to come visit Palestinian cities, for any kind of real diplomacy to take place, and for any kind of economic development in the Palestinian territories after a peace agreement. So the way this needs to work has to be with the Palestinians and Israelis working together, which is why everybody talks about a negotiated solution. That has to be the solution. Okay, so why don't we take a short break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about the war on Passover.
Northern Lights Pizza's amazing garlic butter makes amazing breadsticks. Now available in 12-ounce bottles at Northern Lights, Hy-Vee, and Graziano's.
Northern Lights Pizza.
I'm Brian Leach, owner of Service Legends, and my position is Chief Talent Officer.
I'm Nicholas Wonderscheid.
I am Bernie Hobbs.
And I'm the Service Manager.
Marketing Director and Client Relations Manager.
Everything that we do is about ensuring that we exceed your expectations.
Our clients are important to us. 100% satisfaction.
We're not just focused on heating and cooling. That's the easiest part of our job, actually, is fixing furnaces and air conditioners.
Everyone that we come in touch with, we want to improve lives.
Bottom line is, we've got our installation guarantees, 25% energy savings guarantee, comfort guarantee, temperature selection guarantee, property protection guarantee.
100% satisfaction guaranteed, fixed rate or it's free.
All of those guarantees are backed up with a 100% money-back guarantee to hold ourselves accountable to making sure that you get what you're after.
Just fixing the problem today. If they have another problem 5 days down the road, it's still fixed rate or it's free.
We use what's called straightforward pricing. Our technicians are going to give you an exact to-the-penny price on what it's going to take before they move forward with any repair. That way you know what to expect.
It's the same price every day.
No surprises.
If you get off work at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you come home, you realize that, oh, my furnace is broken. Now you need to call somebody out that night. You shouldn't have to pay more for that.
We're guaranteeing service 24/7.
We run afternoons, evenings, nights, weekends. We're staffed to work that.
Phone rings at 3 in the morning. You'll get one of our representatives answering the phone every time.
We're not sending you out to Timbuktu in some call center. It's our Service Legend team members, our mission control team.
I'll take a call anytime.
And then they answer the phones the same way during the day as they do at night.
It's a great day at your service company. How can we make you smile?
That's the only way to provide true 24-hour service.
When you're able to let somebody actually live in their home safely when they weren't able to do that before, where they don't have to stay up at night and worry about, is the heat going to come back on? Are we going to freeze the pipes? Is the baby in the room next door going to be sick because they got too cold? When you're able to help somebody overcome challenges like that, that's impacting a life. That makes a difference. I get goosebumps thinking about it.
I love the team. I love the people that I work with.
We have fun, but we work hard.
I call them my ambassadors of legendary service. If you could just envision what that is, that's who we're sending to your home.
They literally will call in, pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I want to talk to your manager. And I get on the phone, they're like, that technician that was at my house was the greatest technician ever. That's cool to me.
We want to brighten people's days.
Every person that we have going into the house has gone through an extensive background check.
Drug testing, we have a very thorough interview process that 1 out of 140 people make it through.
If we promise you something, that's what you're going to get, no matter what.
We're here when you need us to protect the safety and comfort of your family.
If you're not happy, we're gonna make it right.
If we're willing to put 100% money back guarantee on what we do, what type of work do you think we do?
Give us a call. We're there for you 24/7, 365 days a year.
Enough said.
Hi, David Kaufman. Welcome back to the Whole Megillah. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein. And Mark, let's talk about the war against Passover. Yossi Klein Halevi's article that was published today.
Okay. Basically, tell them about Yossi Klein Halevi. It's a very distinguished thinker, writer, religion.
Connected to the Shalom Institute in Jerusalem and
Yes.
Often speaks about Jewish identity and the politics of Israel.
Right.
And this is an interesting article that talks about Jewish identity. So Who are the Jews? A religion, an ethnicity, a people? The question has taken on special urgency in our time. At the heart of the anti-Zionist assault is the notion that the Jews aren't a people, but only a faith. That premise is normative throughout the Arab world, and especially in the Palestinian national movement, all of whose factions, from Fatah to Hamas, deny the existence of a distinct Jewish people with a right to national sovereignty.
I can attest that this is a long-standing problem, because I've been in several different mosques where people have asked me. It's always tagged onto something else. The first is the Jews were so much part of our country, Arab country, and it all got broken down with the establishment of Israel. First of all, that's some sort of a revisionist viewpoint of how the Jews lived in Arab countries. But then the second thing that invariably comes is somebody saying, well, the Jews are just a religion, and religions don't merit their own countries. So this is nothing new.
Well, and the interesting thing about it is that to a certain extent, the Jews Judaism is more complex than that, because you do have Jews who believe that they're only part of a religion and not a people, and then you have people who believe they're Jews who are part of a people but don't practice the faith of Judaism. Yeah, much more of those.
But backstep one instance, and the fact is, especially in Islam, if you are not a practicing Muslim, you are not a Muslim according to their understanding to begin with, and therefore I can understand to a certain degree how Muslims will say, well, so-and-so person is not a practicing Jew, therefore he's not a Jew. But then you always have to say we don't view the religion in the same way.
Well, and then you have with the Orthodox perspective that you talk about Jews who aren't practicing Judaism, right? I mean, it gets really complicated, but that's the way it is. And then you get this idea in our liturgical cycle, and this is where Halevi gets in the article. The Jewish year cycle tells a different story. Passover celebrates the birth of the Jewish people, the beginning of a coherent historical narrative. Shavuot, 2 months later, celebrates the giving of Torah at Sinai, imprinting the Jewish people with a distinct path to God. The Jews then are a people with a specific faith in that order. The Seder implicitly reinforces that hierarchy of identities. The essential Seder ritual is the retelling of the Exodus as though you yourself left Egypt. And the message is there is no Judaism without the Jewish people and its story. And I point this out all the time. We are to imagine that we ourselves were there. That's a fundamental premise of the Jewish religious tradition. And it functionally is even part of the what I would say is the secular tradition, which is kind of odd that there's what's clearly a religious belief among the secular tradition, because most Jews, I think, will understand that historically they were there. They were, I mean, not just, and there's a speech by Ezer Weizmann to the Bundestag, which I think is the pinnacle of this, where he not only talks about how we were there during the Exodus, but also how we were there at different points in time in Jewish history. And Jews really, as a people, take to heart this idea that we were there not just at the time of the Exodus symbolically, but physically, we were actually there. Our souls were actually there. But not only that, we also were at every other point in time during Jewish history. We were there during the Crusades. We were there during the Spanish Inquisition. We were there when Jews were expelled from Spain. We were there in the death camps in Europe. We were there coming to Israel to establish the state of Israel. We were there at all those points in time. We were part of the collective at those points in time. That's a whole different idea. And many secular Jews, or more or less secular Jews, still have this concept or this feeling that they're part of this, even if the whole rest of the ritual apparatus that goes along with Judaism is not part of their lives.
Well, there's some sort of a quotation where God says, I'm taking you out of Egypt to basically give you the 10 Commandments at some juncture. And so what some people hear is only, I'm taking you out of Egypt. Meaning the secularists tend to downplay the religious.
They downplay all the religion, but like I said, they don't just see the Exodus as the only story they're part of. They see all of these as stories they're part of, and they're in the Haggadah, Passover Haggadah. There are 4 children. And Halevi points out as a teaching from Rabbi David Hartman from the Hartman Institute. He says that the Haggadah's definition of Jewish heresy offers us a definition of Jewish identity. The evil child of the Haggadah refers to the Jewish people as you rather than us, is the one who refers to Jewish people in ancient times, the people who were there during the Exodus, as the only people who were there. We were not there, right? I was not there, they were there. That's not how the Jewish tradition looks at it. The Jewish tradition says we were there, and it says that a heretic is somebody who says they were there. Right? And what Hartman is implying is that a Jewish heretic is somebody who refers to other Jews as they, as not including themselves as part of the collective.
And so the answer in the Haggadah to that, if I remember correctly, is had you been there, you would not have been worthy to been redeemed.
Yes, you would have been stuck in Egypt, right?
Yeah.
And so what Halevi points out here is, unlike Christianity and Islam, where heresy is the rejection of a belief, for Judaism, heresy is self-exclusion from the community. Now, granted, that's a belief too. I mean, I don't really agree with his definition of belief versus belief, because I think that the belief that you're part of the community is a belief, but it is an issue that self-exclusion from the community is the primary heresy in the Jewish tradition.
Certainly, there's the aspect of identifying with the whole, and as far as I'm concerned, look, it's the Jews from Ethiopia, maybe a different skin color. The Jews from Yemen have differences. They are still part of the people and part of my extended family.
Yeah, you have an issue in that if you really look at who the Israeli people are, you go to Israel, you go to many different places in Israel, you go to the old city of Jerusalem and you seek out some of these Mizrahi communities, these Yemenite communities, or you go to places around Tel Aviv. The reality is that many Israelis are very dark-skinned, not just the Ethiopian Jews, but many of the Jews that come from Arab lands, and particularly the ones that come from North Africa, from Morocco. Many of them are much darker skinned than the Palestinian population. I mean, you're walking through these lands and you're wondering what countries people come from. If they weren't dressed as more religious Jews, you wouldn't even know that they were Jewish if you saw them in a different context.
A quick anecdote.
That's who Israel is.
One of the friends we have from Israel who's dark skinned comes to the United States and people expect him to be able to speak Spanish, which he doesn't do. He speaks Hebrew.
Okay, well, let's talk more about this after we take a short break. We'll finish up and go to the end of our show. Thank you for joining us.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Credit cards are like grandkids. They love you, sometimes get out of control, and it's fun to get a new one. Who can stop them from piling on?
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of Des Moines. At the end of the day, you can return the grandkids, but you're stuck paying off bad credit card debt. We'll help you put the fun back into using credit cards responsibly. Right, kids?
Yeah! If you need help getting credit cards off your back, call Consumer Credit of Des Moines.
Rockton Prevention is celebrating 25 years of creating a caring community. We want to say thank you to the tens of thousands of Rock High School mentors that have carried our message of health, love, and encouragement to over 1.5 million children, teachers, and parents. Our mentors teach children methods and skills to prevent bullying and drug use. Thank you to all the school administrators, teachers, and counselors for their opportunity to serve you. Rock on, fair citizens, rock on! This is Pat McManus for Rockton Prevention, the Richard O. Jacobson Foundation, and this station.
Northern Lights Pizza, your home of the tasty crust. Our garlic butter sauce now available in 12-ounce bottles at Northern Lights, Hy-Vee, and Graziano's. Northern Lights Pizza.
Hi, my name is David Burrier, your Hope Coach. I host a live weekly talk show called I've Been There every Thursday afternoon at 5:30. right here on webcast1live.com and on my weekly radio program Saturday mornings at 10 on Truth Network 99.3 FM. I interview common everyday people who have survived incredible life challenges and who testify to God's faithfulness in the midst of their storms. So join me as we bring a message of hope and encouragement. Everybody needs hope. I know, because I've been there.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Welcome back to the Whole Megillah. I'm Rabbi David Kaufman, joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation. And just to reiterate, our opinions are our opinions alone. They are not representative of the organizations we work for. And I'm the Rabbi of Temple B'nai Jeshurun, just so you know that. So, Mark, we're talking about Jewish peoplehood versus Jewish religion, and Halevi points out in the article something that always strikes people as strange when I bring it up to them, which is that because the primacy is on peoplehood over faith, you actually have Jewish atheists and certainly agnostics, and you don't have that in Christianity or Islam, obviously, because somebody who's an atheist is therefore not a Christian or a Muslim.
Right.
Because those are based on belief.
And by extension, I think people who do come to a synagogue or temple, many of them have changing ideas of what their deity may be, or which is quite natural, and nobody puts them to the test.
Yeah, I mean, you can essentially believe whatever you want. We have a wide range, almost whatever you want. We have a wide range of beliefs within our congregation about God and about the afterlife and about revelation, the traditions, what's been revealed by God for us to do.
So it's always been tempting if somebody from particular congregation said, well, Judaism is only a religion. But what about Fred? He doesn't. Is he not Jewish then? And so that stops the conversation, basically.
Yeah, it really is definite. I mean, if you know anything actually about how Judaism functions, the idea that Judaism is only a faith doesn't work at all. It clearly holds no water the second you try to apply that to a real Jewish community, because especially if you're dealing with a Reformed Jewish community, because there's no faith test. And we operate very clearly with people who don't share a common set of beliefs. There may be a very small set of commonly assumed beliefs, but not everybody even holds on to those. And, when we talk about some of the holidays and the rivals that are most observed by Jews, Passover Seder is near the top of the list.
No matter
it may be even at the top of the list of things that people who consider themselves Jews do in connection with that identity.
Let's stick on this topic for a while, because there have always been in my lifetime different versions of the Haggadah and different reasons why Jewish people convene around the table to tell the story. And sometimes, some are basically labor Zionists, some are socialist Americans, people in favor of climate change, all sorts of Haggadahs out there.
Well, and Israel was founded by secular socialists. As much as there's this desire to pin it on religious Zionism, not true. My great-grandfather was a secular socialist Zionist coming from Bessarabia in the early 20th century, fleeing from the Tsar's persecution, bought land in Pardes Hana in what was then British Mandate Palestine, in order to settle his sister, to bring his sister and her family out because he managed to go to the United States. He was not a religious man. He grew up in a religious family, but he had rejected that and went to go live and work with some secular members of his family. He didn't do this out of a religious obligation. He did it because he believed that the Jewish people needed a safe place, a homeland to go to avoid persecution. And he was very right. I mean, that's the situation that we face today is that Jews are persecuted as a people. They're not persecuted because of what anybody believes. I mean, it's very clear that they're not persecuted because of what they believe, because if that were true, it wouldn't fly at all, because Jews don't share common beliefs across the world. We have people who are connected essentially to some sort of fundamentalist religious tradition, and we have people who are atheists completely, who don't believe that God ever contacted Jewish people about anything and don't have any ritual traditions whatsoever, much less a belief system that's connected to a religion. And when you're dealing with those two extremes, there's no way you're persecuting Jews because of what they believe. That can't even come into the discussion, and it's never been true. It hasn't been true that's been the case for many generations, long before the modern time period. You had Baruch Spinoza in the 17th century already dealing with this stuff officially as an essentially agnostic. He wasn't really an atheist, even though he's credited as being one of the free thinkers. He definitely was a free thinker, but he was really an agnostic who was part of the Jewish community, but not connected to the religious aspects of the Jewish tradition.
Well, one more aspect that Halevi brings out, the difference between a particularist religion and universalist. Do you want
Well, so Judaism is essentially the religion of the Jewish people. It's not designed to be a religion for everybody else. And so what Halevi's arguing, I talk about particularism and universalism is that we have universalistic ideas in Judaism, that we want to repair the world. Tikkun olam is a goal that we try to make the world a better place, and in that sense, we want to help everybody, whether they're Christians, Muslims, Hindus, other religious traditions in Africa. It doesn't really matter. Our goal is to make the world a better place and to help humanity. At the same time, what we believe why we are doing that is because as Jews we're supposed to do that, or even then, it is part of our religion to encourage us to do that. And to be honest, many secular Jews see this as a primary religious, or a primary goal of what Jews are, a primary part of their identity, even though it's a religious idea. And it's a religious idea that comes from a mystical tradition. It doesn't even come from the traditional Orthodox view of Judaism. It comes actually out of mysticism. So here you are with people who are essentially secular, who adopt as one of their major practices a mystical religious tradition, so a hyper religious tradition, if you will, and then apply it in their lives. Jews are kind of an odd people about this, is that we have this mixture of secularism and religious belief and mysticism and academics, and we apply all of them. At Passover Seder, actually, if you get to go to a Passover Seder, you'll see all of those traditions in one place, because depending on what family you're dealing with, as Mark says, there are different Haggadot, the stories of Passover that go with the traditions. And there are all kinds of different prayers and readings that are brought into the tradition that reinforce them. These are all part of what our tradition is about.
Which makes it such a universal thing for the Jewish people, that they can find their personal identity without going outside of the peoplehood in order to find it.
Well, and it also makes it inviting for other people to come in. I mean, Passover Seder is something that is welcoming for all sorts of people, because no matter what your belief structure is, you can connect to it in some way, or almost, almost no matter what your beliefs are, you can connect to it in some way. And so, as we celebrate this Passover, as we come up to it on Friday night. We extend a Chag Sameach to all of our listeners. Hope you have a happy and healthy holiday. And as you're enjoying your Passover Seder, we hope that you'll take the time and think about all of the things you have in your life, the blessings that you have in your life, and how you got them. So one of the major themes that we have in our Passover Seder is to think about our ancestors and the blessings that God did for our ancestors that we have received through the generations. It's interesting, when American Jews came, many immigrants who came in the 20th century, the way they looked at the Passover Seder was about their own lives and coming to the United States. And as a celebration at the end of the Seder, many of them actually sang, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing," because they were thankful for being brought from a land of oppression to this great land of freedom. With that, we say God bless America and have a happy and healthy Passover holiday. Thank you for joining us.